Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Belly to Belly. And today our conversation is about localizing with a Z or localizing with an S, communication for successful U.S. market entry. And we're joined by good friend Philip Auerbach from Auerbach International. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you, Bill. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here with you.
It's great to be with you as well. And so before we get into our topic, which is, just such an amazing issue for companies, not just coming into the U.S., but crossing any border to localize to their local market. But before we hop into that, it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about your background and about Auerbach International and your services.
Sure. Well, let me start with the company first. So Auerbach International is a 30-year-old LSP, language service provider, as we're known in the business. And it's very unusual because as far as I know, we are the oldest or second oldest in the country, which means we've got tremendous expertise and wisdom. We translate anything into 120 languages, and anything means brochures, manuals, contracts, websites, videos, anything written, spoken, or electronic. And we do this with the finest professional linguists with guaranteed accuracy. And we've been doing this for 30 years.
Fantastic. And are there specific parts of your service that apply most to companies coming into the U.S.?
Primarily the translating or interpreting part. We also do some global marketing where we can advise. We primarily advise American companies into which countries they can expand and the strategies to get them there. And we can do a bit of the reverse of advising inbound companies what might be the best marketing strategies for them. But we do that primarily in the form of communications, in spoken and written communications. So their websites, their manuals, their brochures, and so forth. Okay, so that's primarily how we aid, inbound companies in the United States. Fantastic.
So let's hop into our topic, and our audience companies coming into the U.S. and so their concern is certainly about appealing to the U.S. market. I would imagine in your 30 years of experience, you've seen some horror stories or nightmares, some challenges that companies have in terms of communicating with the U.S. audience. But are there some that come to mind in terms of the big challenges?
Yeah, there are three primary areas I think that inbound companies need to be aware of. The most basic one applies in both directions, US companies going abroad and foreign companies coming here. But it's primarily in what we call name screening or name evaluation. So, for example, the biggest mistake that companies make, and it's to me astonishing that especially the billion-dollar firms, the Fortune 1000 firms, don't think of this, or they think of it quite a few $1 million too late. They don't screen or they don't evaluate their company name, their product name, or their slogan going into another language. And they think that, of course, what works in one works in another, and that's absolutely not true. I can give you some examples of two car companies that, let me see, they expanded. Yeah, well, this is foreign to foreign. So Honda expanded into Sweden with a car called Fritta, and they were a bit oblivious that Fritta in Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian is a word for vagina, which is not a terribly good name for a car. And similarly, not to be outdone, Ford expanded its Pinto, which was in the United States, into Brazil, and was not quite aware that Pinto in Brazilian slang means male genitals. So very similarly, that is not good. And in terms of another Swedish company, IKEA was going, I don't know if they did launch or they were going to launch. It's sort of, it was into the United States. They were launching a workbench, which is sort of a little compartment with tools in it and a table and something on wheels and so forth. And the Swedish name meant full speed, as if full speed ahead or doing something quickly. And they were going to launch it with their Swedish name, which was spelled F-A-R-T-F-U-L-L, which again was not terribly bright coming into the United States. So lesson number one is always to hire a firm like us or a language service provider to do these name evaluations before you enter a foreign market, because this is incredibly cheap insurance before you spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and then discover that your name doesn't quite work.
Absolutely. And so you said there are kind of three that come to mind in terms of big challenges. So number one was getting your slogan and your logo and your names correct.
Right. Sorry. Let's turn that off. It didn't turn off.
Sure.
The other is basically to check sales methods. So what works here doesn't work there. What works there may not work here. This is a very, what is called in sociology, a very informal society, a very impersonal and informal business environment. So one of the ways that we're very informal is that everyone first names each other. And, you know, coming from other languages or other cultures, that's considered very impolite. Now, a lot of people do it because of American television and movies and influence and so forth. But so, you know, foreigners know that that's one way to talk to Americans. But Americans make the mistake of assuming that you can talk to address a foreigner in his first name without being given permission to do so. So that's very dangerous. But one of the biggest sales methods, again, this is an example. It's an example. It's not inbound. It's from an American firm called Best Buy, which most people know, and they expanded into China, and they did it. They did it in their American way, which is basically to set up a store where they have all the products grouped together by product type. You know, televisions, vacuum cleaners, refrigerators, whatever, and all the brand names were together. And in China, that is simply not done, because in China, the stores are by brand name. So brand A would have, you know, it's all of its electronics, refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, televisions in one section, and company B would have all of its products in another section, and so forth. And obviously the American model didn't work. So similarly, when foreign companies come here, they need to understand, as is in any international business venture, how one does business in the target country in terms of, you know, formality and structure and pricing and colors and packaging and so forth. And one of the keys is, and I've got a binder of bloopers like behind me. Those are binders, one of which is bloopers, which has a lot of foreign packaging written in English, where the English is, again, not quite accurate, such as I can't even remember it's a Japanese company, and I can't remember the manufacturer, but it's a doll or a picture of Elmo, like a character, and it's the slogan in English, which should have read Elmo, clap your hands, and instead it said Elmo, crap your hands. So again, a matter of name evaluation, slogans, packaging, knowing what works in the target country, and of course checking it with the linguistic firm and a marketing agency to be sure that your assumptions are correct.
That's amazing. Well, it sounds like your blooper binder is maybe a future HBO series or something. It sounds like it could be pretty funny.
The other issue, which is equally as interesting, deals with language as well. a mistake that companies make is to assume that the translations that they do coming into the United States would be valid. And I'm sorry, I'll just turn this off. The translations coming into the United States would be valid. And in many cases, they do hire professional firms to do it. There's a step that's missing, however, and that's a step that I call acculturation. So something may be accurate in English, but it's not the way that the American audience would respond to it. Acculturation is a word from sociology, but it means to obviously adapt the product or the marketing or the whole method to the target country, to the target culture. So I'd like to give you an example of this is a German firm that came into the United States. I'm not going to name the firm, of course, but they deal with taxes and accounting and laws and so forth. And they had their website translated into English in Germany. And again, the translation is accurate, but it's not quite right. So if you don't mind, I'll read this to you. The question of what a company or a share therein is actually worth may arise for a number of reasons. In addition to tax events, inheritance and gift tax, such assessments play an important role in the arrangements for a company's succession, in the admission of new shareholders, in the drafting of compensation clauses, in articles of association, or in the context of disputes. Now, again, the words are accurate. Each word has a meaning, but put together, the sentence is too much of a jumble and is totally unclear. And so what we did for this client is to basically rewrite, to edit the English translation to make it more appealing to an American audience. So again, it deals with taxes, which by nature can be quite dry, but the revised sentence reads a bit better. So the revised version is, the need to value a company or corporate shares may arise for a number of reasons. These include inheritance and gift tax calculations, arranging for a company's succession, admitting new shareholders, drafting compensation clauses in articles of association, or resolving disputes. Now, whether you understood all of that from an accounting point of view doesn't matter, but most people would agree that number 2 is slightly clearer than number 1. And
I would say a lot clearer. And as you said, there were some incorrect words, not just the way they were used, but incorrect words for the purpose. So yeah, no, it did much clearer in number 2.
So a lot of this involves just knowing the benefits and appeals. So, you know, a company can translate something, but it then has to be sometimes rewritten or acculturated with the benefits and appeals of the target country, in this case, the United States. So Americans focus very heavily on the price of anything. You know, can you get a bargain? Are you getting the price at the best possible discount or whatever? Whereas other cultures don't care as much about price. It's important, but it's not as important. And they focus on other issues. How does your product or a service benefit the family? How does it help the environment? How might it serve, you know, whatever other causes might be, you know, of interest to that target country? And sometimes it's solely about quality. How does this product reflect the quality of your brand name? So again, Americans focus on price. We don't care as much about these other issues, although we say we do. But it's simply an example of when you acculturate for, you know, for a certain market, the marketing itself, of course, has to have those benefits and appeals.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's amazing, you know, you think of the companies that would have these challenges and you assume that the large companies have figured it out. But from your examples, it seems like every company could be subject to these challenges as they cross borders without, whether they have the internal resources or they look for external resources like yourselves to help support them through making sure that they're appealing in the right way and as they intend to the the new audience. So besides acculturation, and you mentioned certainly getting professional support, are there other best practices in terms of ways to make sure that you're localizing all of your communication? I would imagine it's not just the marketing communication, which has been mostly what we've talked about, but also the employment communication and any of the relational community communication as well. Are there other best practices to make sure that people, companies do this correctly?
Well, yes, and again, this works in both directions. American companies going abroad, foreign companies coming here, but certainly issues around employment law are very different. In this country, they often differ by state in terms of benefits. Parental leave, for example, maternal leave, parental leave after a baby, number of sick days, unemployment insurance, that sort of thing. Whereas in other countries, it's national. In most countries, it's national. But in the United States, it's often by state. And sometimes there are national rules that override it. But certainly understanding, American business practices, which is common. People here normally get 2 weeks vacation. In Europe, they normally get 6 or 4 to 6 weeks. Here it's more of expertise is cross-industrial is the wrong word. Expertise can cross business lines. You can have expertise in sales and you don't necessarily know how to sell the specific product, but you know how to sell, you know sales principles. And so in this country, it's much more flexible, I think, in terms of hiring people for, for the specific positions. It's more about expertise in general, and you can learn the specific company. Whereas in Europe, Europe and elsewhere, it's much more specific by the company and perhaps by whom you know and so forth. In other countries, what's very important are relationships and whom you know, basically whom you know, whether it's school relationships or relationships from friends, from family members, from other networks that you may be involved in. Here, the relationships are important, but they're not critical. So, and this is where I said in the very beginning, it's an informal business culture. So I can be in San Diego and see something and order something from a company in Maine and not know a single person there, not caring about any people there. I just like the product. I call up or I order it online and the transaction is done. In other countries, that does happen also, but the relationships of whom you know at that company may affect that buying decision more than it does here. And here, it's again, it's much more transactional. It's just, does your product or service benefit me? Is the price right? Are the terms and conditions right? Sometimes it's about location. Are you in my region? If I need to meet with you, if you're not in my region, can I meet with you by Zoom or whatever? So these are issues that a lot of foreigners don't often, I don't want to say understand, it's that they don't consider as important. That again, because in most countries, relationships are more key, and here relationships are important, but they're not essential. And you can do business with anyone that, with whom your goals match the product or service you're looking for.
That makes a lot of sense. So this is all really interesting, Philip, and as we've been talking about, as you've been sharing your insights, it really makes me think about how much you're into.
So you froze again. You stopped. I can't hear you.
Or send a telex or send things via mail. And today, a company not only has its own website, and maybe it even sells via its website. And if that's the case, they're probably also selling on Amazon or, various other marketplaces, and that's all unique communication. Then they have presence on social media, LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and so on. And even more challenging is many of their employees have a presence on social media.
Right.
So that it seems like the best practices in what you do must be evolving in that regard quite quickly. I mean, number one, for a company to sort of manage its language and own presence, not just on its primary website, but through all the channels that they are now communicating, seems like one level and one kind of growing challenge. But then the other is to be helpful to the employees or that are also public facing in terms of the presence that they have on the various social media sites. Is that what's kind of going on in that space or way to help companies in that regard?
Do you mean in terms of their social media presence, or do you mean just in?
Well, okay, so yeah, so a company, so I guess in my mind, what we've been talking about is sort of the kind of vanilla communication a company might do. They have marketing material, they have a website, but I guess I'm thinking, and what I'm asking about is the fact that, a company that is either that is somehow selling online, they may be selling B2B or they may be selling to consumers. They are most likely not only selling on their own website, but they're selling through lots of different marketplaces like Amazon and Shopify and so on. Plus, they're also engaging with their audience on various social media platforms. Right. Plus, their employees are likely engaging with customers and consumers on social media. That's, again, and this is a phenomenon of the last 10 to 15 years. How does that change or add to the best practices that you might advise with companies in terms of sort of, again, it's one thing to control things in 30 years ago, and because there weren't all these other medias, and and it was much easier. You had one pipe essentially that went out from a company. Now you have multiple pipes. Are there some thoughts about how companies sort of add to the best practices of sort of managing the man? You are just one. Everything is ringing in your office. But are there some additional best practices? Are there some additional best practices that you would advise?
One of the best practices that I did not mention before that is very important is that this is a country of English speakers, but it's also a country of a lot of ethnic speakers, a lot of minority speakers. So you may need different marketing avenues, marketing methods for different audiences. So, and this is something that a lot of companies forget, especially consumer firms. So in this country, there are, I don't remember the latest census, but there's something like 62 million Latinos, of whom 41 million speak Spanish at home. Now, they may not all be first-generation immigrants, but the point is that they do speak Spanish at home. And research shows that overwhelmingly, people would far prefer to be addressed in their native language rather than be addressed in the second language. So 41 million people is bigger than many countries out there. And that's just in this country. So therefore, it's important to have a Spanish marketing strategy. And again, about acculturation. Latinos are much more interested in family and how a product or service benefits the family unit as opposed to the individual. Or for example, if in many cases, if a daughter wants to buy a car, she'll take either the father or brother with her. And it's not that she needs their permission, it's that it's part of the whole family ethic, that the family emphasis that it's a group decision in a way, even though this seems to be an individual decision. So again, a part of it is just understanding, about ethnic marketing and how that works, because it is different. Of course, there are so many different platforms now, as you say, and should you, each platform again has its own method. One of the big issues, the biggest challenges, of course, is that many years ago you could pick up the phone and call someone and reach that person directly. Now, one of the benefits of the pandemic is that people now are working from home, and if they want you to reach them, they'll give you their mobile number. So that's great. So you can reach them again directly. This is fantastic, because in normal business practices in this country, you have to go through the maze of calling a company, and if you know a person or you know a title, then you can hopefully get through. If you know the last name or whatever, know a title. Sometimes if you're lucky enough to reach a phone operator, that's a miracle. And that person, I praise that person all the time and say that his or her salary should be doubled just for being a public service to companies that are trying to get through. But again, it's much harder now because a lot of business is simply impersonal. It's done on the internet, it's done through LinkedIn, it's done through social media, and it's much harder to develop the relationships. And so what you do, I don't know. It's just a major, it's just a major issue that a lot of companies are facing. How do you get through the chatter? How do you get through to the right person that you want? There's still ways to target people. It can be through LinkedIn. It can be through buying lists. Can be through, buying lists for direct mail. Could be through buying email lists. There are ways to do it. But again, it's a much harder reach to do it than it was 10, 15 years ago, for example.
Sure. Yeah, and my question may have been a little bit different. That I was looking to see if there were best practices around how does a company manage. So I'm assuming that that there are different people, or maybe even different departments in companies that manage various communications. So some manage social media, others will build the marketing material, and some might have responsibility for different country websites and so on. But the idea that, or even different language websites, and it seems today that there are really two tensions. One is sort of getting it right, as you say, in terms of making sure that you have that appeal. The other one is speed. The market is moving so fast that if we don't respond to questions or move quickly to assist a customer, then that's, that seems like at a certain point that's as bad or worse than maybe getting some language wrong. So it just seems like it becomes more difficult for companies to make these, to communicate well quickly, I guess, is on all these sort of channels.
Well, it's communicate well and quickly, and frankly, to provide good service. There's so many companies out there, so many American companies out there that I think provide lousy service. And to me, the first rule of any business is, are you reachable, and are you responding, and do you remember who pays your paycheck? And it's not your accounting department; it's your company, your customer, your client. And so many companies American companies just put up so many barriers, especially millennial firms. And I'm old, so I'll razz against them. They put up so many barriers of they have no phone number, or they have some general information website. I'll get back to you within 48 hours or something. Well, no, sorry, I need an answer now. My business is affected now. And these companies don't seem to get it, or don't seem to care, or they're so big and so prosperous and so arrogant that they just don't give a damn. And this to me is outrageous. Personally, it's outrageous. I pride ourselves on being a small boutique firm that has won awards for customer service. We've in our case, again, a language business, we've translated 2 billion words over 30 years with A plus accuracy and guaranteed accuracy. And if you pick up the phone and call us, we are there. If you email us, we respond certainly within an hour, if not within minutes. And this to me is how you should treat customers. But a lot of companies don't care, don't do it. And they're very successful. I can't knock it, but this to me is not a good business model for growing, for succeeding. And look, a lot of young people are very accustomed now to apps and the impersonal, again, business relationships. Just communicate with an app and hope that it works. I just had an interaction this morning with an agency, and their lovely new website doesn't work properly. And so it took me 2 days to get someone on the phone to tell me how to get something that cost all of $5. Well, how much time did it take me for $5? It's ridiculous.
Right. And will you go back after that experience? Yeah, that's in the end. So you make an exceptional point, and certainly being contactable and making it easy for customers to reach you. Certainly for companies coming into the U.S., having a U.S. phone number, having a U.S. address, all of those things give the customer a sense of your care and your response rate to their questions, problems, and so on. So yeah, no, all good thoughts. So I'd like to wrap up with a question about sort of measurement. Are there some ways that leaders can measure how well they're doing in terms of localizing their communication as they enter the U.S.?
The word localizing has many meanings. I presume you mean international companies coming here and how they measure success coming here. Is that right? Based on the localizing.
Well, yeah. Yeah. How well? I mean, are there some ways that a company could measure how well they're being understood in the marketplace?
Well, ultimately, it's about sales. Well, that's not true. Ultimately, it's about inquiries or responses. Sales are a different issue. Do people respond to you? Do they click on your website? Do they contact you in some way? Do they engage with you? Obviously, English is the major language in this country. If your website and your communications are not in English, people aren't even going to give you the time of day. They're not going to look at you at all. But of course, it has to be in American English and with benefits and appeals that work in the United States. So, a lot of Americans have funny examples of opening some packaging from Taiwan, and of course it's in Chinglish, and the parts make no sense. And I don't know that I'm not picking on Taiwan, but that's a typical example, or of China for that matter. Come on, if you're doing business here, have a presence here, and that works in any country. Have a presence here, have a phone number here, have an office here open during, obviously, US business hours. And remember that we've got 4 continental time zones plus Hawaii and Alaska. And if you market to Canada, because it's basically a North American market, Canada's got another time zone on the eastern side called the Atlantic time zone. So, are you responsive to time zones? Are you going to close at, say, 5 o'clock Eastern time, and then half the country is still open? So does that make a lot of sense? So of course, acculturating your message, making sure that you're open and available, and I guess it's ultimately about receptivity. Have you done your research to know what sells, what your competition is doing, what niche you're occupying that your competition is not occupying, what need you're fulfilling that no one else is fulfilling, or that you're fulfilling better than someone else. This is what can make all the difference. And of course, most importantly, getting the message out that you're doing it. You may have the greatest product in the world, but if people don't know about you, it doesn't really matter what you've got. And so again, that's very critical, and there are lots of ways to get the message out. So
yeah, yep. So true. Yeah. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
no, it's just there are multiple ways to get the message out, whether it's press releases, of course, and it depends if your market is local or national or regional or whatever, how you're going to market. But these are all market research decisions that you need to know before you even begin to set foot in the country. And some people don't do their market research properly, as I illustrated in the very beginning, and just have concepts that simply wouldn't work for various reasons. But this is a very tough country and a very tough market because there is so much competition. And obviously companies do make it, and foreign companies make it coming in. And you can build on your qualities, build on your assets, whether you're known for your reputation, your quality, your longevity, your engineering, depends on what the product is. But obviously build on that and see if that appeals in the United States, which tends to value youth and sometimes youth and innovation is more important than longevity. Again, it depends on what the product is. But
so if I could summarize, because what I heard was, if you want to measure results to how effective your localization is, one way to do it would be to measure response rate, and then you could also, it sounds like, and I'm not sure you said this, but I'm inferring that you could also possibly do some A/B testing with different messages to validate that your response rate is optimized, and that you're connecting with the intended audience appropriately. Is that a good summary?
That's very true. And perhaps again, if your product is national, to see whether there are any regionalisms, regional variations that you may need to have. And part of it's by testing, part of it's by asking people on the street sometimes. If I show you this product versus this product, which one do you like better and why? Very, very inexpensive market research. And again, some of it's very subjective, but there are, again, subcultural issues in this country that people don't necessarily think about, and including wording that people don't think about. I don't know, just a very simple, parts of the country say the word sofa, other parts say couch. Some people say, a bag lunch, and some people say sack lunch. And, if your signs, for example, are in the wrong wording, then that can affect sales also. So a lot of it goes.
Some say soda, some say pop.
Some say soda, some say pop, exactly. And yeah, again, we have a service that, well, this is more for American companies going abroad, but this again deals with ethnic marketing. An example like a hair salon or a nail salon or something where you're opening just a small shop or a series of shops where you may have other ethnicities. In Los Angeles or New York, for example, there are hundreds, 500 ethnicities at least within the city limit. If your salespeople don't necessarily communicate with these ethnicities, there are ways to do it. We have a product, there are two products. One is called the Instant Language Assistant, and one is simply called OPI, over the phone interpreting, both of which allow an English speaker to have his or her words translated instantly into another language, into an ethnic language. So this is a wonderful way to gain sales or to retain sales or to communicate with a customer. Again, foreign companies are probably not going to open a lot of dry cleaner shops where you might have to deal with this, but you never know. You don't know who's going to walk into the store that you have who doesn't speak good English, and you may want to communicate. So again, we've got solutions for these issues so that they become, so they don't become barriers to success. They become ways to succeed, to again gain the sale from many additional people that you would not have thought of before. And then of course those people will tell their friends, and that brings you a lot more instant business without even trying.
Fantastic. Well, Philip, I want to thank you for taking your time today to kind of help us wrestle through localization with a Z, or localization with an S, and kind of figure out some of the best practices. I'll make sure to share your information in the description, and certainly invite our audience to like and subscribe to our podcast. But again, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been super helpful, and I invite anyone listening to contact Philip and seek out more of his wisdom and support.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. It's a wonderful pleasure to be with you, and appreciate it.